to go ahead and do that. But thank you all and hello. Thank you for coming to our final Global Futures Forum planning town hall before the forum itself. Just on the outset, I want to thank everyone who's been engaged over these last 4 months with us, sort of coming to all the sessions, but also welcome anyone who is just joining our journey. And we're very excited to have you all part of these planning sessions before we head into the Global Futures Forum itself on the 20th, 21st, and then with the engagement day on the 22nd of March. So we have lots to cover, and we'll jump right into it. Our call for today is going to be an hour and 30 minutes. We're going to, as opposed to the usual hour, we're going to start with the usual round of updates from the team on streams of work, and then we'll go into the co-leads of different tracks who are just going to summarize very briefly, and I'm looking at the co-leads here in 3 minutes, please, what's going on with your tracks, just so that to be able to invite inputs towards the end. And as we always go into our discussion portion of these town halls of how we can sort of improve and work on different things together. Our metric of success is if people walk away today with a couple follow-up Zoom calls and a big to-do list, then we've succeeded in what we wanted to achieve in this planning town hall. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in, I can see her on the screen, Sophia, to give us a couple updates about the youth track. So Sophia, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Nudara. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here in this town hall again. And I'm going to do a brief recap on what there is the progress we've been doing regarding the youth track. And recently we've had our first informative session for youth and children that over 26 people attended approximately. Thank you very much to all this ecosystem of organizers that help us build that session. And we have in the future the second informative session in which we're going to be more specific in how these young people and children can participate in different initiatives related to youth engagement before, during, and after the forum. And then we also decided, we have the idea of doing a youth pavilion, and we decided to do it online so we can bring to the table the opportunity for more young people to be actually part of this forum and to have a meaningful participation. We know that some people already reach out to Nudara, that they are interested in working and helping to build this space online. And also we're going to try to use friendly platforms for young people and children, for example, Zoom, to do these different sessions or consultations with them. And actually, in this youth pavilion, we're going to host a consultation with youth and children during the event, and the key takeaways of this consultation, they are going to be presented in the youth reception. Another news I have is that this youth reception is going to take place finally on the 21, not on the 19, just because of organizing issues, because it was really hard to try to find a venue on the 19 as it was Sunday. So it's going to be on the 21. We're trying to finish the arrangements for that, the stakeholders we're going to invite, and the agenda for that reception as well. And then last but not least, we're organizing a session with the researchers that sent us their papers. So we can have a call with them, update them on the process, and also let them know that they can apply to present their work in person in the forum if they are able to fund their participation, or online if they are not able to join us in New York. So that's about the most important updates on the youth track.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And we'll stick Sophia and Camilla's emails in the chat box as well, in case anyone has any questions about the youth track. We've also got a couple youth planning calls that we run with sort of a wider group of people in this call and otherwise that are sort of engaged on the youth track. So if you're interested in being included in those planning calls as well, please just let us know. Again, key dates are in the calendar. I've put the link to the calendar on the chat box, and we will be following up with an email. So to go into regional forums and give you an update on the engagement day on the 22nd of March, here is Jeff. Jeff, over to you.
Actually, Nadara, it's over to Fergus.
It's over to Fergus. Fergus, where's Fergus? There we go. Hi, Fergus.
Hello. So I'll just run down the roster of regional meetings that are preparatory to the GFF that are underway, or some of them have actually taken place. Starting with Africa, in partnership with the Civicus Group of the National Association of or the Civicus Group of National Associations, C4UN is organizing an event on the 15th of March. And we'll have registration details available for that soon. We're also very pleased, and this is a second track of organizing in the African region, that we're pleased that a delegation will be at the GFF from the AU Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. This is a body of the AU, a formal part of the institution that brings together civil society voices from across the continent. And they're planning a series of meetings following the GFF. In the Asia Pacific region, there are 4 meetings to report. 2 have taken place. The Young Asian Voices 2.0 for the United Nations We Need was a very well organized and well prepared meeting that took place on the 4th of February. We'll have a report on that on the C4UN website. And also the Pyeongchang Odasan for Peace, which is the successor to the Pyeongchang Peace Forum of previous years, took place just last week with a series of meetings. On the 1st of March, a meeting for Pacific Island states, the Pacific Region Forum is taking place, and I'll put the link for to register for that event in the chat. And there will also be an event on the margins of the Intergovernmental Asia Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, and that takes place on the 27th to 30th of March. In the Latin American region, there's sort of a 4-stage process underway. Consultations will begin with a March 1st Zoom meeting. Email discussions will take place thereafter from the 1st to the 14th of March. A youth session via Zoom will take place on the 17th of March. And then there will be a feedback following the GFF on the 28th of March to feedback results from the GFF to the region, with further meetings planned for after the GFF. And I think that's the case for many of these regional processes. These are meant to be to kickstart an ongoing process. In the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa, events are a little further behind. We're just getting started with the organizing. Khalid Imam from the Justice Call Egypt is the focal point there. And in Europe, finally, the Europe Regional Futures Forum, covering the entire European continent from west to east, will take place on the 13th of March from 11 to 1 CET. And I'll put the links for some of these regional meetings, the ones that have not taken place, in the chat, as well as some C4UN resources, the toolkit, and so that if anyone out there wants to become involved in regional meetings or start one of their own, there are resources that would enable them to do that. Back to you, Nadara.
Thank you so much for that, Fergus. And again, lots of dates there. We'll not only is Fergus going to put some of this in the chat box, but also we'll make sure that we follow up in one of my, as you have seen, very long emails that I send around after these calls. Okay, to give us a bit of a brief, oh, actually, sorry, before we move on to that, just a quick note on the 22nd of March. So engagement day with UN missions on the 22nd of March. If you're interested in either getting involved with that, or you have some contacts at different missions that you'd be able to support us with, the idea is to take some of the outcomes of the Global Futures Forum to these permanent missions. Please drop us an email. We will put Toussaint's email in the chat box, and he's going to be running point on collecting information for that. Okay, to give us a quick brief about socials and outreach, which are growing, our numbers for registrations are quite high. So our team's been doing a fantastic job. Here is Karamot.
Hi everyone. Yes, so to give an update about the socials that myself and Maddie has been co-leading. So for the future the Future Forward Friday, we want to feature civil society organization that is taking part in the Global Futures Forum. So we would want to talk with you about what your expectation is about GFF. So if you're interested in us featuring you on our social media platform, that is both the Instagram and the Twitter, you could send a message to myself or Maddie. Maddie is going to drop the email that you can contact us all. Or if you are well interested in it, you could just take note in the chat box. So Maddie will be taking note of that, and myself and how we're going to reach out to you right after this call. So if you want us to feature you on the social media page of the Global Futures Forum, we would love to do that. Also, another update that we want to do is that increase publicity for the Global Futures Forum. We're working on the social media and outreach group. We're working on a filter that you can use. Go on the website, put in your picture, and then download to use as a social media profile or put on your platform. This is going to increase engagement and conversations around the Global Future Forum. So we're trying to encourage everyone to please take note of that, as we're going to be sending the link very soon. So that's not about the social media update. And about the registration, I think Nudara is going to talk about that info, about the number of people that have registered for the Global Futures Forum. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karamot. And just to say, what we're going to do shortly after this call is send around just a small blurb that you can please put in your outreach, put in your newsletters that are going out. We really need support with ramping up online registration now. We have over 500 people registered to join us in person, and 400 people have registered to join us online. But just as a capacity perspective, we're not sure how many people we can sort of bring in straight away. So we are now sort of encouraging a lot of online registration. We have a new form for that as well, which we're putting in the chat box. But please do sort of use this piece of content that we put out there, just a small blurb to stick in your newsletters, on your social media. That would be very, very helpful. Okay, so moving then into a couple programmatic updates, which are, oh no, before that, Monique is going to tell us about a new tab that we have on the website. Monique, over to you.
Thank you, Nudara. Yeah, so here, let me just share my screen and we can take a look at the website. So it's just taking a second. Okay, is that showing? Yeah. Okay, so here we are on the website. Oh, is it's still
yes,
loading?
Okay, we're good now. We're good now.
We're good now? Okay. Right, so here is the Global Futures Forum part of the C4UN website. And if we scroll down, we'll see that there's a new tab called Thematic Tracks. And if we go there, we'll see that there are segments for each of the different tracks, including the names of the co-leads, key dates, and additional resources. And we'll be adding to this as we gain more information from the different tracks. So there you go. And that's our only update. We've sort of settled down now that we're getting closer to the actual event.
Thank you, Monique. And if you do explore that tab and you see any additional resources that you have on hand that you think might be useful for the different themes, please do send them along to myself and Monique, and we'll make sure that we get them up on the website. We're hoping also to have some track summaries coming off the back of this call that feed into that as well. Javier, if you don't mind, I'm going to rattle through a couple more things and then we'll come back to you for your question, if that's okay. And if you could just drop something in the chat in the meantime. So a couple quick programmatic updates from my end. Our agenda, our program for the 2 days is updated just a little bit. So here is what we currently have. Again, very happy for inputs, for additions, for ideas. So again, there's an online event form, online side event form. We'll be taking submissions for those side events up until the 1st of March, so the end of next week. And we'll have on the first day, it'll be online side events. On the second day, we'll be having the online youth pavilion. So it'll always be a parallel stream that's running online. Big changes really in terms of when we last shared this is that we've split up the track work so that it's a bit staggered, just because we had some, really helpful insights to say, hey, what if I want to pop into more than one track during the Global Futures Forum. So we've now split them up a little bit so there's options of sort of floating between different tracks, moved around to accommodate that, the Talanoa dialogues. Again, if you know people who have really interesting and fascinating stories from the grassroots that they might be willing to share during these Talanoa dialogues on different tracks, please do reach out to Dan and I will put our emails in the chat box. We've got an interconnection panel, plenary, regional panel where we'll ask some of our sort of regional representatives to come in and say something. Again, staggered track work. At the end of, we still need to add this in here, but at the end of day 2 is the youth reception. At the end of day 1, we're going to have an evening program, which will likely talk about CSW and the Water Conference and some of the context within which we're hosting the Global Futures Forum. And finally, day 3 is the 22nd of March. I will share around this program in the follow-up email so that you have that on you as well. A couple more things. So the co-leads will soon start shaping the program for the different thematic sessions. So if, as they're talking today, you find something that you're particularly engaged with or interested in, please do reach out to them about helping shaping that part of the program for the Global Futures Forum. Again, we'll put the online registration link in the chat box. The entire event is going to be hybrid. We'll have Zooms running through the background. We'll also have the online engagement spaces for day 1 on side events and day 2 for the youth pavilion. Venue. So most of the Global Futures Forum is going to be happening at the Church Center UN or the Baha'i International Community building. We will provide details on where and when, etc. And we're also just working on confirming a plenary space if it's going to be aside from these two venues. So we will keep you posted and we will let you know. Final quick note from me on logistics is we've got a couple requests from different groups about translators. So if anyone is sort of willing to or knows of people that are willing to translate, not live content, I'm not sure that we have the capacity to do that this year round. We'll look at it for 2024, but sort of outputs, if people might be interested in helping to support translation of output, whether it be reports or knowledge products that we're working on, please do reach out because that's something that we've gotten some questions about. And finally, note takers. This is the community I'm going to go to for this. If anyone in their organizations knows of someone that could potentially volunteer to support with note taking at the Global Futures Forum, please do let us know. We're sort of actively looking for volunteers to help us with note taking. Okay, that was a lot, but I will follow up via email. And just for some final deadlines, updates regarding logistics, here's our logistics coordinator, Renata.
Thank you, Nodara. As Nodara mentioned before, due to the high volume of registrations for in-person participation, the registration for in-person will close as of February 20th. So please, if you have your travel arrangements or if you're confirming your presence, please send us an email to gfuturesforum@gmail.com so we can confirm your presence in person. Also, a deadline for people that have indicated that they would be able to sponsor a participant, that would be February 17th. If you are still able to sponsor a participant from the Global South, please let us know by February 17th. And then the registration for online participation will close as of March 17th, really close to the GFF. If you have any questions or concerns, please email me at gfuturesforum@gmail.com. Thank you, Nodara.
Thank you, Renata. Okay, so that was sort of the big spiel of updates from our end. Again, if you, with regards to visa letters or whether or not you're participating in person, especially looking at this group here, because these are sort of the people that have been engaged with us for a while, we'll make sure that we have space for your in-person participation. Please do reach out to Renata to confirm your plans if you're going to be joining us in person, and please do so ASAP. Okay, that brings us to the conclusion of the logistics portion of this town hall. So what I'm going to do is hand over to Dan, keeping in mind if you have any questions with regards to that, please put it in the chat box and we'll typing responses on there. But also we will open the floor to sort of an open discussion at the end, but I just want to make sure that we get through all of the presentations or briefings first. So Dan, for People's Pact update and also to introduce our co-leads. Dan.
Thanks so much, Nodara, and I'm very pleased to see 45 people on this call. You are definitely the pool of resources that we're going to be drawing upon to make this a successful event. Thank you in particular to Johannes, who put in the chat box interpretation capabilities. That would be really interesting. So Nodara didn't ask me here to say thank you. She asked me to provide some updates on what's happening with the People's Pact. But this is a big thank you. I have been so impressed with the e-consultations thus far. The content has been really robust, dynamic. The approaches have been different and interesting. So I'm really grateful to those of you who've been participating, to those of you who've been facilitating. And I'm really looking forward to the outcomes, some of which already exist. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the different co-leads. These are co-lead teams, so they've selected one person from each team to give a little bit of a report back on the status of the e-consultation. I know one is yet to begin and one has long ended, but it'll be really nice to just get a little overview of where we stand. So we'll turn first to the global economic and financial architecture. I believe it's Camilla who will present from that, and then we'll turn to peace and security. Camilla, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Dan, and hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank everyone that participated in our e-consultations and meeting their written comments. We believe that it was a success. We had multiple people participating and sharing their ideas and concerns. I will quickly share the key issue areas that were raised during the 2 weeks e-consultation. So this is a comprehensive wealth taxation and the need to advocate towards equitable spending for tax money in public services, tackling corruption and illicit financial flows, and the need to reinforce and promote existing organizations and campaigns dedicated towards tackling these crimes, issues with global value chain and supply chain. Another key area of discussions were the challenges in measuring economic progress and the need to develop new methods for measuring progress and economic strength based on the Sustainable Development Goals. and the geopolitical trends and challenges. So during the consultation, we noticed that there were a few areas in which the participants seem to reach consensus. However, there were other areas where there was some disagreement, such as the feasibility of implementing wealth tax and the role of the G20, among others. So for those that want to send their comments and did not have time yet, we welcome final inputs until this coming Monday, and we will send around the updated version of the report. So please, if anyone here has comments or knows someone that would like to participate and did not have the opportunity during the 2 weeks period, please just let them know that they have until Monday to do so. And lastly, on Thursday, 23rd, we will hold a GFFA town hall discussion from 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. New York time. You can find the Zoom link in the chat box here, and I hope you can join us. We will introduce some new draft ideas for our top 5 list of proposals coming out of the e-consultation for feeding into the next month's Global Future Forum and the People's Pact. We know that the People's Pact will only have an interim set of ideas, so by the time that the Global Forum, Future Forum, it will be important for civil society to get focused and strategic in order to be effective in influence the member states' negotiations ahead. So please join us next week for this town hall.
Camilla, that was excellent. To sort of recap the process that she used that I think would be helpful for all 7, a little bit on some of the content that's come out, a little bit on some next steps, and then a call for consolidation of next steps, I think, of advocacy points. I think that's really helpful. Thank you so much, Camilla. We'll turn now to peace and security. I think it'll be Alan, followed by human rights and participation. Alan?
Thank you very much. So we just started officially yesterday, and we're running until February the 28th. But people had already taken the opportunity of the start of the consultations to start submitting their proposals in the e-Google listserv, whatever it's called. We have received about 45 proposals. It's taken a little bit of work to sort of like sort them and put them into different categories and see where the connections are. And we had the first online session this morning. European time, 7 a.m. So that was timed for Asia Pacific. And then we'll also repeat that this afternoon, 4:30 p.m. European time, which is for people from the Americas, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And that's really just the first sessions today, just putting forward the proposals, explaining them and getting like initial feedback. And then we'll have a follow-up on February 23rd. With so many proposals, it's going to be quite difficult to consolidate them down to the 4 or 5, which we're supposed to come up with to present to the Global Futures Forum. We will, in the report, we intend to include an annex which has all the proposals for people's interest, because that sharing is valuable anyway, and hopefully we can come up with the 4 or 5 to submit. And thank you to the Coalition for the UN We Need for putting in the links on the Global Futures Forum page to the web page that we have set up for this these consultations. And on that web page, we're also uploading the proposals so that anyone can read them, regardless of whether or not you're participating in the peace and security consultations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. Just to highlight that he said that they started the e-consultation yesterday, and they came in with about 45 recommendations, and I've been reading them. They are robust. These aren't just off the back of the hand. So good luck to Alan, and thank you. This, I think, is a testament to the need and the interest in these conversations. So we are turning now to the human rights and participation track with Jeff, I believe, followed by Digital Compact. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Dan. Yeah, we were the second e-consultation on human rights and participation from the 18th to the 31st of January. We also had a very robust online Zoom call that featured a lot of Global South participation. We were very pleased. We asked participants to identify proposals that would protect and promote civic space and ensure inclusive, safe, and meaningful civil society participation across the UN system, and help develop key civil society recommendations on the what to promote human rights and strategies for their enforcement and implementation on the how to share with member states. So some of the key issue areas that were raised during the consultation included mainstreaming human rights on all levels and sectors worldwide, the elimination of all forms of discrimination across the board for effective remedy and enforcement of rights for youth, children, women, girls, persons with disabilities, and the inclusion of caste as a protected class within human rights legislation. There was a focus on intergenerational and women's and girls' rights, again, on persons with disabilities, on climate justice and human rights, on protecting and promoting human rights at the national and grassroots level, on strengthening civic and multi-stakeholder participation modalities at the UN, on improved digital cooperation for participation. So you can see there's a lot of intersecting dimensions of human rights with the other thematic consultation tracks. Some of the areas of consensus is that participants agreed that in transformative change at the UN is required if the organization is to become fit for purpose in the 21st century, which includes a fundamental reframing of national sovereignty as it relates to the protection and enforcement of human rights in an integrated world. We looked at a new social contract anchored in human rights among all stakeholders as called for by the OCA report. There was also a focus on the 2030 agenda and in human rights, and that the SDGs and its potential successor must be closely linked to other global and regional sustainable development frameworks, including the Paris Agreement and the Addis Ababa Agenda. There was a focus on enhancing the participation of civil society and stakeholders at the UN with a number of key proposals that were discussed in line with some of the OCA recommendations, but also augmenting key OCA recommendations. There was also a focus on UN institutional reform proposals to enhance human rights protection and enforcement, recognizing, for example, that OHCHR still receives less than 5% of their regular budget. So there was a call to double the resources of OHCHR. There was also a number of proposals on the reform of the UPR, and so there were many recommendations about human rights and participation during the consultation. So the challenge is not going to be so much one of disagreement, but of policy coherence and priority in terms of our collective advocacy going forward. So that's going to be, a continued part of our discussion. So in the lead up to the GCF, participants helped develop key civil society recommendations on the what, to promote human rights and strategies for their enforcement and implementation on the how. So at the Global Futures Forum, participants will be invited to prioritize key CSO proposals that both critique and implement key OCA recommendations related to human rights and participation, including proposals not considered by the OCA, with a particular focus on accelerating the SDGs as the UN marks the SDG Summit in September. We are in the process of finalizing a report that will include a compendium of submissions that were made during the course of the consultation, and that report will be out by the end of this week. We hope to have another e-consultation, perhaps with Craig McIver, director of the New York office of OHCHR, to kind of help us further focus some of our recommendations as we head into the Global Futures Forum. Thanks, Dan. Back to you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jeff. I have read the draft report and it is robust. So what we're going to do is hop over to the Digital Compact. I actually will be presenting on this one because of most of our co-facilitators are actually not in this time zone. So Muzna and others are having trouble joining and reporting back, and then Anna, who's here, actually is having trouble looking at the document. the summary document, which I will actually put in the chat box. It's a first draft, but we're among friends, so feel free to take a look. So, and then the last thing I'll say before presenting a little bit is that we're going to have a little mid-presentation break for questions, because I know a couple people need to leave. And if any of the co-leads or others want to ask questions about cross-pollination or anything like this, then you're welcome to do so after I give a little bit of feedback on the Global Digital Compact. So this consultation took place from the 1st of February right up to Valentine's Day. I know many people decided to forego their Valentine's Day plans in favor of contributing, so thank you. It ended up being quite a robust e-consultation. We have a lot of recommendations coming out, and I see a bunch of people jumping in. So establishing a UN department or a UN commission to focus on this. It is an emerging area that could not have been envisioned 75 years ago. There should be conversations on closing the digital divide, matters of access and participation in the e-space, empowering individuals, but also ensuring that human rights are well protected. So there's a very strong cross-linkage with Jeff's group. And in fact, many of the people who participated in one also did in the other. And that's why we organized the consultations in this way. There is a lot in the discourse around security and protection and access, but that isn't sufficient. There has to be some norms, some underlying principles that upon which this Global Digital Compact can be based. And that's something we need to continue to explore. And you can see at this penultimate section, the Global Futures Forum, there's a lot of further exploration, individuals and democracy, empowering individuals and democratizing, human rights online, and closing the digital divide. So after this one, we have a quick interlude for questions and answers, and then we'll switch over next to the last three will be development, and then environmental governance, and then global governance innovation. So let's take a little break. Are there any questions, any comments at this point? Just for those who are here to ask any of the co-leads. I see Richard has something he wants to ask. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I know you're having robust discussions, Alan, in the peace and security track, and I'll join the 10:30 call right off of this. But it would be good, maybe inspiration for the other tracks to hear, we confront, I think all the tracks, global institutional architecture, in your case, Security Council, Peace Building Commission, General Assembly, putting a spotlight on veto misuse, the Liechtenstein Initiative, for instance, in the Security Council. But there's also operational tools. The Secretary General has been big on prevention. Of course, all the concepts in the new agenda for peace, peace building, peacemaking, peacekeeping. How are you thinking when you whittle down your focus to a strategic number of proposals? How will you strike a balance in those two areas? But the second one that I think is particularly germane to all the groups is the SDG summit. Came up again and again. It was like an obligatory line from many member states that the SDG summit is the most important focus in 2023. How do you square that circle for peace and security?
Are there other questions? We can take a couple and then maybe ask for responses. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, Dan, I just, I mean, this is more perhaps operational, and I understand you've invited the co-leads of the thematic consultations to a Zoom call next Monday to discuss this, but I just wanted to put it out there, and that is, we're at a point now as we engage the thematic consultations to really tweak the in-person program at the Global Futures Forum in a way so that there's a really clear understanding of how we will engage the drafting process during the Global Futures Forum, how people online can do that, what will be the outcomes. I'm not suggesting that we have answers at this very moment, but in the days and weeks ahead, I think we really need to tighten the program in a way that it's operationally coherent. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Jeff. Are there any further questions? If not, let's hop over to Alan, and then I'll address what Jeff raised. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for that question, Richard. Just before I answer that question, I'd just like to add, and I did put this in the chat box, that as well as the thematic and the regional consultations, there are also consultations amongst various constituents and stakeholders. One of the really important ones, I think, and I see Maria Fernanda Espinosa is here with us, is with parliamentarians. And Maria has been invited to address the Assembly of the Interparliamentary Union, which is 178 parliaments. There's normally about 700 parliamentarians attending. So it'd be really good if we have a chance to hear from Maria how that might then be able to feed into parliamentary engagement in the Global Futures Forum. So maybe there might be a little space for Maria to reflect on that at some stage. And then coming back to Richard's question, Richard, I don't think it's actually possible. You've indicated that there are a number of issues to do with peace and security, and some are to do with the various bodies of the United Nations Security Council. We've got recommendations on that. The General Assembly, we have recommended on that, on the International Court of Justice. Then there's all the implementation procedures, the toolkit that the UN Secretary and the UN has. There's recommendations on that, and there are a whole range of them. What the best thing I think we can do is we can reflect and include in the annex to the report that we're doing these range of proposals. Also to remind people that coming through the one track of the Summit of the Future and the Pact, for the future, the final declaration, is not the only opportunity to take forward these proposals. That we also have, and particularly for peace and security, the new agenda for peace. So we can feed many of these proposals into the new agenda for peace, and not just we collectively, but also individually, and we can support each other. So we have a multi-track approach to advancing these proposals, which means that we don't load everything into the 4 or 5 that we're going to be highlighting as we come into the Global Futures Forum on March 20th and 21st. The other ones that might not make it into those final 5 are still at play, can still be taken forward in various different ways that are still really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. So we will turn very quickly to the next tracks, but I just want to respond to Jeff's comment, and it actually ties into what Alan was just saying. I have found this process to be phenomenal because the number of ideas presented has really sort of, I think, humbled all of us, which means that this notion of 3 to 5 recommendations is going to be much more difficult to achieve. However, it also means that we're going to have a robust compendium of possibilities. We can create like a nice choose your own path compendium and see what that will look like. I don't know, but the degree of content and depth and thought that's been shared with this group has been really amazing. So we do need to think strategically. We do need to cohere around some key asks. And we sometimes will have to set aside our ego and our pet projects in order to do so, which will be fine. And that process we'll discuss on Monday among the co-leads. How will we whittle down to the key things that we want to advocate on? And some of them may be shared, some of them, we'll see what it looks like. But I don't want to lose all that other rich content, nor the interconnections between the different tracks, which, as we all know, anything related to this will be a little bit artificial. So I know that Alan asked Maria Fernanda to respond to something, but maybe we can wait for the end because I think she's already been tapped to speak towards the end, if that's okay. I know, Alan, you may not be here, but the call's being recorded, so you can always listen in, and you probably already know the answer anyway. So why don't we turn to the development track? I believe Javier will offer a few thoughts on what's been happening there.
Yes, thank you very much. The development track worked between January 25 and February 7th. It was a very interesting discussion because of the issues that participants have raised. And listening to you, I think that we are more or less a cross-cutting consultation because some of the issues raised in our process are deeply linked and connect with issues raised in some other consultations. The key areas in which the participants focused their attention were the first one, very interesting for me because it was unexpected. is what the participants call the 2030 Agenda as a living document. There was an extended worry on how the context is changing, how rapidly and how deeply it is changed, and how we can keep the 2030 Agenda ambition considering those changes. They referred to updating the SDGs, but not as in a way to changing them or discussing their content, but working on this kind of issues. How can we better link different SDGs, and how can we better consider the SDGs in a very changing and challenging world context? I will not present in details all the ideas, of course, because we would need much more time. But something that was mentioned in the human rights consultation was also mentioned here, but in a more open way. Participants suggest to learn lessons from other reporting countries to strengthen the 2030 Agenda and SDGs reporting processes. One of the processes mentioned was the UPR, but also they call the attention of the Committee of World Security work. So this is one of the cross-cutting issues I have referred, and other is stakeholder participations in sustainable development global efforts. Some participants still say that it is not clear what participation means in the UN language. If what they refer when they say stakeholder participation, and they will ask for, or they were asking for more clarity on what the UN means for participation. There was also conversation on the idea of trying to impose in a certain way the expression of meaningful participation and not just participation, considering the difference between one and the other. There were also very different mentions to the issue of measuring sustainable development, something that also came up in the finance consultation. Of course, we have a strong consensus on the idea that GDP is not a good indicator for sustainable development. And participants also raised issues related to financing for sustainable development. They clearly refer that it is impossible to think on accelerating or even keeping the ambition if we don't have enough resources to work in the SDGs. We will be sharing with you a report in the coming days. We are working on the details, and I hope you find there very interesting issues to keep discussing. Just to mention a couple, participants strongly support Fox's proposal of creating a global resilience council, and also participants called us as C4UN to work on the design of a civil society strategy aimed at creating an environment for strengthening the SDGs before the debate of the post-2030 agenda. So they are starting to think what comes next, and I think that it is also important to link this issue with the OCA process. Thank you.
Thank you, Javier. Let's turn right away to, I believe it'll be David, though it could be Nandini, presenting on environmental governance.
Is Nandini on? I was just going to tell you, Dan, that what we did at the start was what I did at the start before Nandini came back from her vacation, was to think just in terms of the what and the how for our questions. And then she came up with 5 brilliant questions, which we've now done 10 Zoom calls on over the last 5 days. We're halfway through our consultation, and we've gathered masses of very, very rich data and ideas and a lot of learnings. The 5 questions were on what is global governance, what kind of global governance we're looking for. Then we were looking at trust and accountability. We were looking at the technologies for transition to global governance, which is close to the how. And then finance for action to get to that kind of global governance, also figuring into the how. And then a final question yesterday on geoengineering and other technological ideas for delivering environmental governance. Are they a boon or a bane? And should they be nipped in the bud, or should we actually encourage them? So answers to these questions, I've tried to capture in a daily one-page update, which will be available online. And from them, we're teasing out 7 to 10 recommendations. And I'm rather chagrined that Alan's got away with 45. I'm sure we could have got way up there, but you told us 3 to 5 is what we've got to slim down to, Dan. So we thought we'd go for 10 as a max. And then we've got 4 more Zoom calls on Thursday and Friday next week, where we hope a lot of you will join us to slim these things down and give us your thoughts on the recommendations that we come up with. Attendance has been lower than we'd hoped, but as I say, very fruitful, very constructive, and yeah, a great process. But I think the other thing that I'd always wanted to bring to the GFF was an idea of how we would do the outreach for the summit. And I already road tested a few initiatives around the idea of world cafes, intergenerational cafes presenting the global summit. And interestingly, Dan, the question that comes back from almost everyone is, what's the point of all this? Why are we doing this? You've been trying to reform the United Nations for the last 40 years, David. You've got nowhere. Why should we get it anywhere? And I think that that's something that exercises us very strongly and makes us feel that actually the process that we're all undertaking now in these few weeks is the start of a journey, not the end of a journey. And I'm very impressed that actually one of our participants, John Blastow from the World Federalist and Maya Groff from the Climate Governance Coalition are building this mega project, Mission Earth Governance Alliance. And building on Richard Ponzio's idea of smart coalitions, we're looking to build a coalition. And so what we've been doing in the environmental governance track is essentially trying to prepare an hors d'oeuvre for that longer meal that we're going to be consuming between now and the summit, and hopefully feed in some good ideas. But it starts next Thursday and Friday, and we'll be sending out the Zoom links on the chat, and we hope as many as possible of you can join us and set us in. But if Nandini has anything to add, please do.
Thank you so much. I don't see Nandini on the call, and I do know that Maria Fernanda has to head out very shortly. So why don't we give her the floor quickly before turning to our last track. So Maria Fernanda, any thoughts, reflections at this point? Or perhaps I surprised her by calling on her now. Maria Fernanda?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Any thoughts, reflections at this point?
Sorry, I'm rushing around. I was throwing my luggage in the room and all of that while I was listening to you. So apologies for sharing where I was with everybody around here. I just missed the last part. I was just receiving my bag here, but at what point are we at? Do you want me to speak about the IPU thing or in general?
I think, Maria, just clubbing together, it would be great to get your response to what Alan said, but equally, you have ended most of our town halls with inspirational words. So it won't be ending the town hall, but in that pattern before the GFF, any sort of thoughts you want to leave us with as well?
Well, thank you, Nudara. And perhaps 3 things. I've been following on and off, of course, the different briefings on the Summit of the Future, the Secretary General, member states, a little bit of yesterday, on and off, I have to say, but basically I have the impression that we the people's part of the equation is what is going to save this whole thing. I wasn't super impressed with what we heard in terms of new ideas, but more on the defensive mode. That's the environment, except of course for the civil society. I heard some of you participating, and it was extremely, the bright spot of 3 days of discussing this issue. Nudara on behalf of C4UN, but several of you, Harris, Javier, Alan, etc., etc. So basically, what I hear, it's this impressive, colossal creativity and engagement from around the world on how to improve the United Nations. These are big things. I fear that the political environment, the political atmosphere, the geopolitical tensions are going to have an impact on the final outcome and on the quality of what we come up with at the end and next year, and even this year for the ministerial meeting. As you know, I was in New York. I don't know if it was last week. I don't remember, but I was there and I had the chance to speak to the chair of the G77 in front of Dan in a corner right there to meet with the co-facilitators, etc., to see Guy Ryder. And believe me, the more I hear what is happening in the real politics world, the more I see that there is a purpose and there is a profound need for us to bring our collective voices together. So this colossal creativity, this co-creation, I think it's really worthwhile. And we have to make the world know, that we are here to make sure that our voices are heard. It's not always easy, it's really not always easy. And perhaps on the different tracks and the 11 themes and all of that, I heard Dan say a word that for me is critical at this juncture, which is the cross-pollination. I don't even know how to pronounce it. The cross-pollination part of it. It's I see that, the SDGs, the Agenda 2030 were a big gain. But unfortunately, they were designed in silos. They were designed so we look at the world in a thematic, non-holistic way. And I think one of the efforts that we have to do collectively is to really filter and choreograph all this wealth of ideas and proposal into a decalogue for transformation, for example. The People's Pact for the Future should be that, and I know it's almost impossible, but then we will have what we call a vademecum. We would have like a big, I see, bank of ideas for transformation, but in terms of our asks, our strategic narrative, we need to have something that is going to be extremely transformational, impactful, something that member states that are a little bit in the same page as we are would take with them and say, here are the 10 things that really need to change so we come up with a better architecture, with a better system, with a better world at the end of the day. So that's perhaps how I see this in terms, now quickly jumping to the Interparliamentarian Union briefing. I was actually going to ask you, the intellect and the creative ones, to help me, to tell me what to say that would be engaging and interesting for the for parliamentarians in general. I honestly think that they have a critical role to play. a very important role to play. As you know, IPU is a permanent observer of the UN. They do have a voice. They had their their annual hearing, I think, this week, if I'm not mistaken, in New York. So I think it's a constituency that is powerful and that we need to reach out to. So please do let me know. I don't know for how long I'm supposed to speak, but share with me any ideas that you might have for that moment. And of course, I think that for the GFF, we should invite the IPU to participate. Martin Shongong or part of the parliamentarians family. Alan has very good connections also with them. I do too, but we have to have them, discussing, interacting, and co-creating with us at the GFF. Sorry, I took longer than expected, and over to you, Nudara and Dan.
Thank you so much, Maria Fernanda. We're always happy when you take longer than expected. We know there are so many demands on your time. It's a pleasure to hear you. I'm sure colleagues on this call, not least Alan Ware and Andreas Bummel, will have some thoughts, as well as, of course, Maria Joao will have some thoughts on this parliamentary question. So if you reach out to Maria, maybe just you can put me in copy, because sometimes I know I help her a little bit here and there with, collating. Whether or not she asks me directly, I suspect that it would be of assistance. So feel free to drop that in. Yes, John Blastos, there are many who I think can offer some thoughts. I think the last track to update on actually begins next week. So I have been asked to just say to stay tuned for the UN and Global Governance Innovation track. It'll start on Wednesday next, so the 22nd. Which is also when there's a really nice emergency platform breakfast meeting happening at my office. That's by the by. I was also asked to provide a little bit of a political update, being that I'm in New York, so I was able to attend the Secretary General's briefing on Monday, and then I wasn't able to attend because it was a closed meeting, but the member states meeting with the co-facilitators on Tuesday, and then yesterday, of course, we were all able to watch and listen in on the meeting with the civil society on Wednesday. And I think Maria Fernanda put it very well when she said that there's a lot of political haziness that seems to be getting in the way of the possible richness of what this process could offer. That is to say, there's a lot of procedural positioning, a lot of questions about processes, and I worry and somewhat suspect, perhaps rather jadedly, that these are more ploys to delay rather than genuine concerns about processes, because I would imagine that the roadmaps that have been issued are quite detailed and give sufficient information. There is a lot happening. So there are, I think, going to be 20 processes that the PGA has ongoing during this session, which is quite a bit for the scale and scope. But he's also trying his best to make them very clear to the member states and allow them to be indeed member state led. That said, my thinking generally is that when a system's not working, the response is not to sit on our hands and wait for the actors in that system to get it in order, but to actually be proactive. So the fact that EOSG is a little concerned that civil society is moving too quickly, that the member states are concerned that civil society is moving too quickly, actually has a little bit of a good side to it. It means that we are causing them to think and hopefully move a little bit faster than they otherwise would. And the fact that we're not having any sessions at the UN for this Global Futures Forum is not a source of dissatisfaction for me. It shows that we are acting as we should. We're pushing, we're thinking, we're developing content, and I'm very pleased with the content we're developing. I know that we have people who are making meaningful interventions in the Global Digital Compact consultations that are ongoing, in the Future Declaration consultations that are just beginning. We have a lot of content moving forward in a lot of these processes. One area that there does seem to be a lot of concern, and it's legitimate, is keeping track of all the tracks. We need a track tracker of sorts. And so I know that the PGA is thinking about this. We also in civil society, C4UN, and some other collaborators are thinking about some kind of a clearinghouse of information that can be shared, so that people can track the tracks more effectively and then engage more effectively. But all this to say that the political reality across the street, not only because of the Russia-Ukraine issue, unhappy anniversary, everybody, but also the issue related to the SDG non-implementation, the distribution of shots around the world. All of these things are causing tremendous stresses across the street. And to also say now is the time to reform the UN is a tall task. But the best time to reform is probably at the moments when we see that it's not working. So there's two sides to this coin, and I think that we have to stay the course, but do so smartly, because again, the politics are challenging. I think we have to engage our capitals as much as possible. Those who are here, particularly from G77 countries, if you can visit your capitals and inform them that this actually would be of benefit to them, not just again to the Europeans and those who have traditionally held the power, I think it would be really helpful. That's perhaps more than needs to be said, but it's helpful just to have this context so that as we're engaging, we're doing so with wisdom, with tact, and with intelligence. So I'm happy to share more, but I think you've heard too much from me. So I will pass it back to Nidara.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you also, Maria, for your wise and inspiring words as always. I do know Alan has said that he needs to dip off just to be set up the peace and security consultations that you can jump into straight after this call. I just want to use this last sort of 20 minutes or so for any thoughts on any of the tracks that have just been presented, any of the logistics, any questions at all. Please do feel free to raise your hand now. Richard?
Yeah, just since this is a rare opportunity, and I bet Harris is going to build on my points in the development space. So Javier, and as I shared with you and your co-facilitators, I think you've had one of the star performing tracks. It's really just the level of the conversation, the richness has been mind-blowing. But the idea we saw this week again by the Secretary General, 500 billion should be pledged, presumably private and public sources. And I think he even singled out the G20 having a key responsibility for the SDGs. I hope none of our tracks will shy away from price tag issues, even when we know things cost a lot. But on that big SDG related 500 billion a year, there's been a lot of estimates that that's even lower than we need when you account for all the domestic private resources, the Addis agenda, domestic revenue that is necessary to deliver on the SDGs. What ideas have you seen in your conversation, Javier, that chip away at that monumental financial issue? And then finally, governance reforms of the global architecture, the HLPF. We heard from Austria and I think it was El Salvador, like 2 years ago, they made a push to have ministerial meetings at the beginning of the annual cycle of reporting on the SDGs, not just July, as we all know, many of us convene and contribute, but the issue of starting the process with high-level political engagement, ministers meeting in New York in February. The whole idea was nixed by member states, I think even by the Secretariat. What innovative ideas have come forward on improving, coming off this very important SDG summit, how we're going to, go as far as we can by 2030 on these really central targets at the heart of the UN agenda.
Thank you, Richard. Before Javier, you come in and respond, I think we'll just take a couple thoughts from the floor and then we'll do some responses and that's how we'll go about it. So Harris, over to you.
Yeah, Richard, I do want to follow directly on what you're saying. Is part of the discussion this past week that appeared as a discussion about what's the relationship between the SDG summit this year and the summit for the future, is that the reality is that there's no money on the table, and what monies are in the many of the OECD budgets are being reduced. So that there's a pressure of expectations, of failed expectations for governance about what are we actually going to be doing about the SDGs. So I think one of the things which we could really do to be helpful is to try to start some new conversations about how global financing of needs should take place. It's quite clear everyone has very large numbers. The co-facilitators are talking in trillions. But what we don't have is a hard discussion about how can we restructure resources globally to make some of this reality happen. And I think that that's a contribution that the civil society groups should try to take a leading role in. And I think because if not, we're risking, and I want to raise this at two different levels, a challenge about expectations about the UN. If on a country level, the feeling is that commitments to the SDGs, commitments to new governance, nothing happens. It'll dissuade people from trying to continue the multilateral system. And another element of that, and I think that's one which we all should think about, is what happens after our Global Futures Forum. How do we take the enthusiasm, the efforts that people have made, and make sure that it gets heard somewhere? And that's the part about multiple tracks of a tracker of a meta tracker. But to keep not having, if the numbers of people who are contributing thinking and time, not be frustrated to see their ideas, I'm going to overstate it, disappear. And so I think we need to work out how we make sure that the energy that we're putting in and the expectations people have in our wider communities find some way of saying this idea should be presented here, and we make sure there's a platform for that. And we sort that out, and we give some good thought as to what happens after the end of March. This means we should pre-plan what happens at the end of March, given the complexities of the schedules, so that the expectations of our communities are not added to the frustration level and unwillingness in the future to try to engage with the multilateral system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harrison. Yeah, we're working on some ideas for output, but I think, you know, no good idea goes unpunished. And if you're willing to support us with shaping some of that, then please do. And as Dan has been stressing, it is a ongoing process. And so we're absolutely looking at this in 6-month cycles. So we started sort of 6 months ago with the Global Futures Forum idea. So March, and then 6 months to September, 6 months again to the next March, and 6 months again to September. So it is going to be a long journey. But just to say that, well noted about shaping our tracks around the roadmaps that have been put out as well. John, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to sort of put a frame around this financing question, where we need these massive amounts of money and where is it to be found. So in the environmental governance track, people are concerned that if one creates global governance that's effective and has enforcement powers, there's a lot of risk around that. And likewise, we're talking about geoengineering and the massive risks of geoengineering. And that's true. But one shouldn't forget that not doing anything carries massive risks as well. And carrying on with the status quo is, in my view, riskier than trying to sort out how we govern the global commons. And likewise with the financing. For sure, it costs money to create governance, but it's nothing like the money you can waste if you don't create governance and walk into a climate catastrophe. So it's not just lost money. Carrying on as we are is going to be very expensive. And then just on the reality of things, which always bugs me, like there's no money on the table and, you know, politics is very hard and how are we going to get the UN to do anything? Well, cool. But at the end of the day, physics reality trumps political reality. And the planet really doesn't care how hard it is to reform global governance. Either we get our act together and find a way as a species to do it, or we'll pay the consequences in climate catastrophe, because the physics is going to beat the politics. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Just for also pointing out this thought for the environmental track to consider as well, of just the opportunity cost of doing nothing, which I think is a really interesting way of framing the funding problem. Georgios, over to you.
Thanks to everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you always. Just to see, let's say, what we have been learning, I think, ourselves, even as civil society, and Richard referred to it, and Dan and Harris before, for sure, that we started perhaps with a more idealized view about engaging with the UN and the Secretariat and being together in this fight to improve the UN for the common good. I think we're learning now that it's not always that we don't always necessarily see eye to eye to the Secretariat, and I think that's fair enough because there are many pressures of all kinds, political and other, on the Secretary General, for example, to take a bold stance. And also, I think there is a problem of operationalization a bit. That doesn't seem to work as a one body that thinks and plans and executes the Secretariat. I don't know if in the past it was ideally, let's say, coordinated, but now I think it's even less, my view. But anyway, we learned that we have to continue, even if we disagree with the Secretariat, even if we disagree with the West and countries that say the right thing, but they don't want to give the money or the technology. We understand now that there is a common ground with the South, and I think that helps also bring in the South not to feel just a recipient of what's happening at the UN, but also a co-creator of things without meaning that they are perfect, anybody there. So, I mean, I think we're getting a more mature role for civil society, and I think like that we can be accepted across the actors in our own right. And about financing, preempting a bit perhaps what Javier will say, because we're together in this development track. It's not only about naming the amount and trying to get the money from somewhere, it's creating new ways to generate value and to include everybody in the value-making process, and also to, let's say, change the financial system, how it works, change the value chains and everything. It's not just saying 500 billion or 1 trillion. If the system does not change to make all this partition or division of resources more fair from their generation, it will not be corrected, even if there is unexpectedly a big amount that is given. But they're going to wars and other things, the big amounts, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgios, for that. Javier, there are a couple questions and remarks directed at you, so I'm going to bring you in here just for any quick thoughts, and then we'll wrap up if there's no more comments. So Javier, over to you.
Okay, very quick. The discussion will refer to financing sustainable development was twofold, I can say. On the one hand, participants strengthened that we cannot have this discussion on financing without rethinking sustainable development governance as a whole. There should not be considered two separate discussions. They are all part of the same. That's the first strong idea that I can mention from the participant. And the second one is that some participants highlighted new initiatives that they considered valuable or that we need to pay attention to them, such as the IMF Resilience and Sustainability Trust, the debt for climate swaps and the debt for nature swaps. And particularly they refer to the Bridgetown initiative on financing resilience or recovery from disasters. There are three particular specific initiatives that was mentioned as possible examples on how participants expected the financing for sustainable development moves on in the coming years.
Thank you so much, Javier. So just to again stress that this is the beginning of the conversation. You know, you just heard the headlines from the different track co-leads. This is really about now inviting you to follow up with them via email, via you know, other means, and just seeing what ideas you can sort of cross-pollinate in the process. So I have the pleasure of now wrapping up our final Global Futures Forum Town Hall. The next time we see many of you will be, aside from all of the regional meetings and thematic meetings in between, at the Global Futures Forum itself. So I have, over the course of this call, curated 7 key takeaways for this group. Okay, here we go. First, please help us with online registration outreach. I am putting the online registration form in the chat box. We will send around a blurb. Please support there. Second, please email Renata if you are joining us in person. Third, please reach out regarding translators, the youth dialogues, the Talanoa dialogues, background resources, or the 22nd of March, which you'll hear more information about. If you have any ideas for this, any recommendations for people that we should be talking to about these sessions. Fourth, please remember key dates. The 23rd of February is the Youth and Children Information Session. You heard a long list of dates from Fergus about the Regional Futures Forum. All of this is on the calendar of the GFF website. Fifth, please reach out to the co-leads regarding tracks. So if you had any interesting thoughts about the way to shape these thematic tracks, if you had interesting ideas about cross-pollinating these tracks, please reach out as we start to put together the program for the Global Futures Forum. Sixth, if your logo is still not on the homepage for the coordination ecosystem of the Global Futures Forum, please reach out to us ASAP. We would love to feature your logo, given that you've been part of these sessions and have invested time and energy in the Global Futures Forum. And seventh and finally, please show up to the Global Futures Forum. Please join us either in person or online. We're going to be running everything both in person and online, both days, apart from the receptions. And we would just be delighted for you to also be involved in the fruit of your efforts. With that, I thank you all so very much for the time and energy you've invested in this process. It is only going to be successful because of that. And it's only, we hope it will be successful as a result of all of our collective efforts. Thank you for being a part of these planning town halls. Please keep an eye out for our follow-up emails, and we will see you at the Global Futures Forum in March. Take care, everyone.